Divorce is often one of life's most challenging experiences, emotionally, legally, and financially. But it doesn't have to feel so overwhelming. Welcome to the Smarter Divorce podcast, where legal expertise meets financial insight, empowering you to make informed decisions every step of the way.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Smarter Divorce podcast. I'm Jane McAuliffe, and I'm with my partner and co-mediator, Kerry Raffinelli.
Good morning, Jane. How are you?
Good. We started the Smarter Divorce podcast to really give people some nuggets of wisdom that we've learned over the years as they embark on the process of divorce. And we want to give some information really as it relates to the entire process of divorce. From that very first thought in your head all the way through post-divorce, to give you some insight, some feedback, some pearls of wisdom that we've learned over the years that really might bring some value to you and help you through the process. Of course, we're always here for a deeper dive into your personal situation, but the purpose really today is to give you some insight to help lessen the financial pain, lessen the emotional pain, lessen the trauma of this process as it relates to both the financial side and the legal side. So my role as a financial analyst and financial advisor in this process is to really help clients take a deep dive into, the cash flow, the budgeting, the division of assets, and all things related to the finances as it relates to the big picture and into the finer details as well. And Kerry's role in this process is really from the legal side. Kerry, you want to share a little bit about what your role is?
Sure. I'm an attorney in Rhode Island, and 41 years I've assisted people getting divorced through the litigation aspect or through the mediation aspect. And I think either way, it's counseling people on the method and manner that the divorce process and path will take. I'm a proponent of mediation in as much as for many years I've seen the litigation piece involving people's lives, and the fact that it takes a long duration, it's been costly, and it takes a toll on the family fabric. In mediation, which, as I indicated, I'm a strong proponent of, along with Jane, it's getting two people together in the same place at the same time and trying to, as best we can, get them to the middle of an amicable, less contentious, less costly divorce. So I add the legal piece by explaining the law to the facts of each party's case, and then ultimately putting together the necessary paperwork to process their divorce. Whether people like it or not, you have to go through the legal process. You get married legally, you get divorced legally, and it's to try and put all that paperwork together, all those concepts of the law and the agreements that come from that together, and then marry that, if you will, to the work that Jane does in analyzing the people's financial lives.
So that's great. And today's podcast is really going to focus on where do I go from here? Obviously, a lot of folks call into both my office and Kerry's office saying, I've either been thinking about this for a long time and I don't know that my marriage is actually going to work. And so I think I might need to explore this. And then there's also clients who come in that have been, surprised. They've either been served with papers or they've found something out and think, oh no, this is time for my divorce, for divorce to start. So we see both sides of clients coming in, and we also see couples who come in who just both mutually decide that it's not going to work out, right, Kerry? We kind of see all three of those aspects.
Right. Yep.
And today we're going to focus on really that first thought in your head, and or, the first time you're trying to find out information on how to go about this. We're going to focus really on that time frame today. Our other podcast episodes will focus on, the second step, the third step, the fourth step, and so on and so forth, all the way through, what do you need to be thinking about after you've signed, the ink is dry on your settlement agreement? What are the steps that you need to do post-divorce to be financially independent, self-supporting, and make the best financial decisions going forward? Because we don't have any attachment to our clients' lives, we are, we often can give an unbiased view, when we're working with parties to say, we don't have any emotional attachment, right, Kerry? So we're able
Right.
to kind of be a third party giving feedback. Um, I lay out scenarios for clients from the financial side, and Kerry can give feedback on the legal side if they were to, appear in front of a judge. How would this look, and how would this play out in court? You
Right.
want to explain a little bit about that,
Sure.
Kerry?
Well, what I stress to people is if you go the litigation model, each party gets an attorney, a coach, if you will, someone that advises them, gives them information, and advocates for that person. Each person has a lawyer. Each person goes to the lawyer generally first before there's any kind of productive conversation between the parties. That takes place usually when people are hurt, they're angry, they're in that model of you indicated, something's just happened and they're upset about it. In mediation, usually the temperatures come down a bit. There's still two people that are upset with each other, obviously. They're getting divorced, but not every divorce has to be contentious. Not every divorce has to be hostile. And our role, although I'm an attorney, I'm not the attorney for either of the parties. And I make that very clear to them. I become a legal information booth, if you will. I give the law as it applies to one spouse. I give the law as it applies to the other spouse. We have laws. We still have to follow laws. And there's statutes and protocols from the court about the method and manner of getting divorced. As a lawyer, I do not advocate for one or the other. As a lawyer in the process, though, I give each person both sides of the law and answer their questions and get to the bottom of it. All in the presence of Jane, in the presence of me, and we put all the facts on the table. Many of those facts come from emotion, but eventually we want it to be coming from a system or an approach of fairness, believe it or not, some level of kindness. Because two people that get married, even though they're getting divorced, their paths will still cross, whether it's in raising their children or distributing their assets. Many times people still run businesses together or still share an asset together. Divorce just doesn't fix everything, so everything's immediately resolved. So that's what we try and do. We try and foster that so it's done in a setting of how can we get to the middle and do this what's best for the two of us.
Correct. Yeah. So I'm going to speak from the financial side. When someone calls me, I would say, and you can jump in anytime, Carrie, but usually top of mind questions are, you know, I'm thinking about this. And my top concerns are, number one, can I stay in the house, or what's going to happen to my house? Um, number two, sometimes I hear, I've never been involved in the finances. I'm so embarrassed to say this, but I don't even know what we have. I have no idea what my spouse has or makes. I've never really been involved in the financial decisions, and I'm scared. I'm paralyzed with fear that I don't know what this is going to look like on the other side. The third thing is obviously a huge topic. If there's children involved, what's going to happen with my kids? Um, Sometimes there's instances of abuse, alcohol or drug abuse or physical abuse, emotional abuse. They're wondering how their spouse is going to react once they announce that this is going to be taking place. So lots of different concerns, lots of different things that come under that umbrella. But Carrie, do you have any feedback to give to that?
Yes. To speak to the first scenario, it's not uncommon where one spouse has more knowledge of, more control of, more understanding of the finances. And
Yeah.
a lot of that's done by design. And it doesn't know a gender. It's not gender based any longer. People do negotiate what their respective roles are in a marriage. When they're upset and angry, then one person's upset about the role that they undertook, whether it's like that my wife or my husband doesn't know, or my spouse doesn't know anything, and that's their own fault. They never wanted to know. And then you'll oftentimes hear, well, that's not the case at all. That person didn't want me to know anything. And so mediation says, we need to open this up. We can't change the roles you undertook. We can't change the anger you may have towards each other. Obviously, you're getting divorced, so it's not like people come in and celebrate their whole marriage in front of us. They tell us things that are wrong, and we try and show them how to make that right. the primary example is one person with the power, one person with the knowledge might not want the other person to know everything. However, now they're getting divorced, and that will be revealed. That needs to be revealed. If you go to two lawyers, you go before a judge, it'll all be done in the form of discovery. Discovery is time consuming, it's expensive, it's in the form of interrogatories, depositions, meetings. That could take a year and cost tens of thousands of dollars. Or you educate the person that had the power and the information about the best path forward is to reveal all that you have, because you're required to fully disclose. If you don't fully disclose and it's later on discovered, you're going to have to share that anyway. So the sooner we can get two common sensible people to come to the middle and realize that, the better. That's on the financial piece. It also applies
and that's through mediation, right? I know you're focusing
Yes.
on mediation, but I think we're talking about, like, broadly speaking, whether they don't even know how they're going to do this yet. Like,
Right.
someone comes in the office, I know from a financial standpoint, and again, like, to your point, I work with folks who are I work with all kinds of folks in this situation, but generally people who haven't been involved in the finances need a professional to help educate them, to help get the information, to lay it all out, explain it, and make sure that they have an understanding so
Right.
that they can be on equal footing throughout the process, right? So that's my role. I also work with spouses who say, well, gee, I want to make sure that my spouse is taken care of. Believe it or not, I still want them to be okay. We still have children together. We still have our family, and I want everyone to be okay. I still love them. I just can't be married to them. But I want to make sure I know what they need. I don't want to overgive, but I also want them to be okay. So in all of those scenarios, someone like myself can help. Mediation is best to do that, right? But even if it's in a litigated situation, I've worked with just one of the parties, whether the moneyed spouse or the non-moneyed spouse, to help talk about those scenarios. First things first, when people come to me, from a financial standpoint, I'm saying, you need to start first things first, figure out what your budget is. You need to figure out, if you really want to stay in your marital home, what is it going to cost you to stay there, right? What do you need? If you're not employed or underemployed, we need to talk about, okay, what does the support look like? What does child support and potentially spousal support look like? How is that going to help you? Is that going to be enough to be able to allow you to stay in your marital home? And then we also do the future planning to say, what happens when that support ends? Is this still a financially sustainable plan for you, or are you going to have to make different decisions? And doing the work together to say, okay, now this makes sense, you can do this. However, you might need to think about making some changes in a few years to say, all right, I know that I can be here for X amount of years, but in that fifth year or whatever year time frame it is, I know that I'll have to sell this house and maybe downsize. And that's okay with me, because I think I'll be in a different segment of my life by then. So understanding what expenses are, that is number one. Start jotting down expenses, start opening bills. If you've turned a blind eye or let your spouse handle that for all these years, please start asking them. And it may tip them off or it may not, but just start to understand what the expenses are. Figure out what your car payments are. What kind of debt are you in? Run your credit report. Understand what you're tied to with your spouse. Are you on certain credit cards with them that you don't have a card for, but they're certainly using that card? And now I don't want you to be surprised that you figured out that your spouse has racked up $20,000 in credit card bills that you weren't aware of, right? So running your credit report, figuring out your budget, and also just understanding what you own. Oh yeah, I worked at a job 15 years ago and I remember that I had a 401k at Fidelity Investments. I should probably look and find where that is. All of this information, as Kerry mentioned before, is going to be part of discovery. Whether you go the litigated divorce route or whether you're in mediation with me and Kerry, I'm going to be asking for every single document. We trust, but we verify. We are very detailed in our agreements, and we write down actually, the last 4 digits of account numbers. I make sure that they're coded the right way. The reason is I want to make sure that everything's done in the most tax efficient, tax effective way. We want to keep things um, properly categorized. We want to make sure that from a fairness standpoint, what does that look like? Who's paying the taxes on what? Who's going to be responsible for that? These are all the facets that go into that. But just from a starting out purely, this is the first thought in my head, what do I need to do? My first, information feedback to clients is start gathering your finances, start working on a budget. And if you need a budget worksheet or need a document checklist on what to figure out what you need, please contact me. You can find all my information and our information together at collaborativedivorcestrategies.com. And reach out, set up a consultation for a complimentary session to figure out what your situation is. As you said earlier, Kerry, when we were talking about this, we hear a lot of the same questions and a lot of the same themes, but really every case is like a fingerprint and there are circumstances that are unique to them. So from like a legal standpoint, what are you talking about with clients on those factors?
Well, I just have to step back a bit. What Jane just pointed out is her role in the case is very, very important. As a certified divorce financial analyst or planner, she does dive into, as she said, the numbers. And many people don't do that in their relationship. I've been practicing 41 years, and there have not been people with Jane's expertise for the past 41 years, at least that I'm aware of. And so as a result, many of my colleagues utilize Jane, whether it's a litigation model or it's the mediation model. It's a very key piece because unless you acquired no assets within a 20-minute marriage, money, money, money is what surrounds how people have to get divorced. Feelings are very difficult. Panic is a reality, but when the emotional level dissipates, and it always does in life, there's great days and there's not so great days. There's sunny days and there's dark days. But during those dark days, it's the role that Jane fulfills that helps a lawyer or lawyers in the divorce process. As I indicated, her expertise is used on the contested side of cases where she's been called on as a witness or on the mediation side. Jane and I have worked with each other for and on behalf of clients that are litigating, and we've worked with people that are mediating. When you peel it all back, it surrounds the money. Money runs homes, money takes care of children. The three major areas are dividing your assets, custody and support of your children, and spousal support, if any. Every one of those themes surrounds, unfortunately or fortunately, support and maintenance for each of the parties. So that role is very important. And then that all applies to law. Law is great, but if you have two lawyers in the room that don't know how to handle the financial piece, then they generally depend on accountants. Accountants are very important for in terms of appraising or valuation of assets. But the core of your case will be the method and manner of how you're going to each fund your separate homes once divorced. And once that's put on the table, each party can feel more comfortable. One side will want to know how much they have and how much they'll need and how much they'll pay if there's payment involved for children or alimony. The other side will want to know what do they have for revenue once they have a job and what will they be receiving to run their home. Two people deserve to run their homes in divorce. Two people will be running their homes in divorce. And the analysis that Jane performs is key and important.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny how emotional money is, right? So, like, everything emotional in your life is tied to a financial consequence or benefit, right? You graduate from high school, you get your first job, you have a baby, you get married, you get divorced, you buy a house, you lose a parent. All of those major life events that are completely emotional in your life surround money, And it gets very difficult when you are in a very terrible place or a bad place and you cannot think clearly, which is, we'll talk about the emotional aspect in a minute, Kerry, right? Because usually if someone's coming in wanting this and someone coming in surprised about it, opposite ends of the emotional spectrum, right? And sometimes it takes someone a lot longer to get their head in the game than someone who wants this. So, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, having a clear head or another party to think clearly on your behalf through this process is critical. If you cannot think clearly through this process, hire people to do that work with you and for you, and giving you clear, you know, clear advice on what the best thing to do is. You may not like what the best thing to do is. However, your advisors will give you good advice on how to proceed. All
Right.
right. That being said, we've talked about how to prepare financially, what to do, start to get your ducks in a row. We start to think about, what happens. You want to talk a little bit about, and whether you're watching this from we're based in Rhode Island, by the way. So we work on mostly Rhode Island cases. I do some work in other states, surrounding Rhode Island. I work with folks out of state. I don't talk about the legal side of things and with clients that I'm working with out of state, because obviously each state has their own divorce statutes that apply to their state. But the basic foundation of financial planning through all of this is the same. Doesn't matter where you live. Budgeting, forecasting, what happens now and later. What does, if this is your settlement, and how does that look out of the next 10 or 20 years? That has no boundaries, so I can work with anyone as it relates to that. Ideally, if they're working through mediation or through their attorney, I love to work alongside with attorneys so that I can support them. I'm educating their client on what their best options are. Obviously, this ties into the whole negotiation thing, but I'm getting your client prepared to make those decisions. I'm getting your client prepared to say, yes, I can live with this negotiated settlement proposal, and no, that really doesn't work for me. So my role is to not only support clients, but to support attorneys in saying, okay, this is what they're offering. What do you think about that? Because ultimately, it is going to be partly your decision what you decide to do. If you want to keep the house and give up retirement assets, and we do the work to say, yeah, okay, that might be a good thing for right now. You're able to keep your kids in the same school system. You're able to do this. You're giving up some retirement accounts, but with a plan to do X, Y, and Z later, your plan will work for you. And if you're doing the next steps of X, Y, and Z, that plan will work for you. So that it ends up serving a much bigger picture for that. When we talk about kids in custody, obviously people want to know if there's kids in the picture. There's so many things right now that have been a little bit terrifying and somewhat challenging. Just given the real estate picture, we've had to get a little bit creative with who's staying in the house and who's paying for what. And obviously people are locked into low interest rates with mortgages, and there's a lot of equity in homes. Can you talk to a little bit about the custody and placement piece? Like, what does that mean, custody and placement of children?
Sure. As I indicated before, one of the key areas, in most cases, the most important area when people have children, is custody, placement, and support of children. Custody is the concept of sharing in decisions of health, education, and welfare. Most people are capable of doing that. The court would decide that if the parties were at odds over who would be responsible for making the primary decision making for children. Placement is the key. Where will the children live? Will they be with one parent more than the other because of life circumstances, jobs, distances? So we call that placement. There's so many acronyms and descriptions for that, but it's essentially, where will the children live? Will they be with one parent as much time as the other parent? Will they be with one parent more than the other parent? And of course, once again, it all surrounds and comes back to money. Jane's piece is money, is children need clothing. Children need to be fed. There are many activities. There's costs of schooling. There's costs of transportation. How will that revenue be exchanged between the two people? So although they live in two separate households, those children will have parity in each of the households, that they won't feel that one parent is superior financially over the other parent. And that all falls back to child support. Child support in Rhode Island is based upon a guideline, but in successful mediation or working with Jane and I, budgets can be established so that neither of the children feel like one parent is the better provider or the higher provider or the one they always go to when they need or want something. So that is under a whole rubric in Rhode Island Family Court of a child support guideline. Placement determines child support, and child support is driven by placement. So that's the middle piece of a case, and then of course in another podcast, I'm sure we'll talk about spousal support, if any.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's just briefly talk about that because, um, I certainly get a lot of inquiries from folks who are either underemployed, working part-time. Their main role was to raise the children. They've been home many, many years. They haven't really developed a career. Because their primary focus are the children. And they're scared, scared to death. And what does that look like from, am I just going to be able to live on child support? The answer is no. So in the state of Rhode Island, I mean, it's different obviously in every state, but can you talk a little bit about, you know, the rehabilitative nature of spousal support in the state of Rhode Island very quickly?
Yes, Rhode Island is dramatically different than Massachusetts. Rhode Island is different than many other states when it comes to spousal support. But spousal support, otherwise known as alimony, is the court's determination, or between the parties in mediation, their own, what amount of money, if any, is paid by one spouse to the other to rehabilitate them back into the workforce. Many times people have been not working because they've been raising children. Their job became being the primary caregiver of the child while one spouse went to work. Once again, a negotiation that happens in many, many cases that people tend to forget that negotiation when it comes time to get divorced. But should party A be paying party B some amount of money to rehabilitate them back to work, meaning returning to training or education, to a job that they used to have that they've lost their skill set for, or to obtain a skill set for a job that they've always wanted to do but didn't do it because they either gave it up in the marriage, or raising children took them away from that. So the court will look at that. They look to the length of the marriage, the conduct of the parties, the employability. There's various other factors that we'll get to in other sessions. But there's always an analysis. That's a factual analysis that yields to a financial result that you work with. But at the end of the day, everybody's going to need some amount of money, whether it's through earnings or the nature and extent of what they've had through inheritances or gifts, or working. Yep. How am I going to pay my bills in my new lifestyle? And that's important to both sides. It is. Because when you're living together and you have one pot of money for the whole household, and that's even difficult in this day and age. I'm sure it's been difficult in every day and age. But now you have two separate households. How will we make this work?
Yep. And again, a lot of my work does with the budgeting analysis to say, okay, how can we structure this so that as my client, say the non-moneyed spouse or the underemployed spouse, like if there's a plan to get back to a career, what does that look like? What level of support do they need now, maybe 2, 3, 4 years from now? How do we make that work? And then that all ties into what does the marital estate look like, right? So the third section of this is marital estate. And what's that made up of? Is there some liquidity that can be allocated in different ways to help each of the parties to buy a new home, to draw from, in addition to, support to help them, be financially independent? How does that all look, and how can we create scenarios for them to discuss and decide on that would allow them to have, again, financial freedom, but also self-supporting financially and what seems fair in that scenario. When we talk about, again, I want to talk about just the division of the marital estate. Those are all the things that have been accumulated for assets and debts during the course of the marriage. It does not apply to, we dated 9 years, before we got married on, 9 years later, and we've been married for 3 and it's just not working out. Can you just give us a scenario of what marital assets are?
Yes. Well, I'd like to say that you should look at the whole body of the work, but sometimes life and law gets in the way. Some people have, as you pointed out, 25-year relationships, but only 5 of which were married. So you have to take the facts and the law and make decisions for yourself, because the court will make that decision if it's necessary. In any professional sporting match, there's an umpire or a referee that makes the call. But
Right.
in
So
what?
I want to interrupt you for just 1 second because
Sure.
it's different in two scenarios. Mediation, that could be very beneficial to have a meeting of the minds and try to work that through
Right.
in a mediated session. If it's a litigated case and that
The,
spouse isn't sharing anything, it's a totally different scenario. So let's talk about those two scenarios.
sure. So, well, in the litigated scenario, you present the facts to the court, and the court will make a decision if the parties cannot make that decision amongst themselves. Um, Not all cases are tried, so in large measure, the discovery or the analysis or the prep work leads up to how you can ultimately settle the case. Uh, so that's the litigated scenario, and then of course the mediated scenario is you present the numbers to each other and you work through a number that works, so that you don't spend extra time and money going to court, spending tens of thousands of dollars only to get to a result anyway. But the factors that go into spousal support, is that what you asked about, Jane?
Yeah, well, no, we're talking about the division of assets here. So, like,
I'm sorry.
what would be considered separate property?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Like, that would not be subject to division.
Right. So separate property is that which you had prior to the marriage or which you acquired during the marriage by gift or inheritance. So any asset that you had before the marriage would not be divided unless you commingled it or mixed it together during
What
the
does that mean?
marriage.
Commingled and mixed together.
Commingling means, that's a very fancy word for taking what was mine and making it ours. If you owned a home on your own before the marriage for 10 years, you were then married for 10 months and you put your spouse's name on it, you've now commingled that asset. You took something that was yours and made it ours. That upsets people at the other end when they're getting divorced. They do it for reasons, suppose, surrounding love and affection in their relationship while married, but they've now made a non-marital asset, a separate asset, a marital asset. If you have a gift before the marriage or during the marriage and you do not put someone's name on it, that's not a marital asset. It's separate property. If you have a gift before the marriage or an inheritance during the marriage and you put the other spouse's name on it, you've now made it marital. So the parties, through our assistance, or ultimately the court, decide if it's separate or marital. If it's marital, it is to be equitably distributed. If it's separate and not commingled, it's not part of the marital estate to be distributed.
Right. And so part of my work not only is just budgeting cash flow, dividing assets, part of my work is trying to figure out, okay, if you had a home worth $100,000 at the time of the marriage and it grew by 200,000 over the course of the marriage, or an investment at the time of the marriage was worth this and now it was worth this, what is the marital value? And that might include some tracing analysis and some, a deeper dive into what was the growth on those assets in order to figure out, is there anything that would be divisible as marital in that process, right? So sometimes it's a separate asset but has grown during the marriage,
Right.
and how do we treat that growth?
Well, there's a separate section in the Rhode Island general laws for divorce called the increased appreciation of value. So if either or both parties show that a non-marital asset increased during the marriage as a result of the efforts of either of the parties in that increased value, then that can be considered by the court to be a marital asset, subject to being divided. The key is, what were the efforts? Was there something that went into the increased value, such as renovations, repairs, improvements, or was it simply market whim that had that asset go up? And it doesn't have to be the effort of the party seeking the increased value. It could be the effort of the party that owned it before the marriage. And so the court will look at, or the parties should look at, what money was infused into that, what efforts were infused into that, what was the marital effort or the marital infusion of income that made that asset, if you will, increase in value. So if, as you pointed out, the $100,000 asset before the marriage is now a $650,000 asset at the time of the divorce, did any efforts go into that causing that $550,000 increase?
Yeah. So some gray area in the law, but some that might require further analysis from a CPA or someone like myself who has the certified divorce financial analyst designation, right? So sometimes there's levels of tracing that would go into cases if they're a little more complicated in nature.
Right.
All right, we covered custody and placement of children. We covered support. We covered division of assets. We covered all those things. I would say, as your first thought, and as coaches, this is what we're telling our clients the minute they walk through our doors to say, I think this is going to be where I'm headed. From your perspective, Kerry, I mean, I know what I would tell people not to do, but as a divorce lawyer, someone comes in, is there anything you would tell people not to do
At the very beginning of the
at the
case,
very beginning?
not to do. Well, I would, I would, well, I would tell them not to panic. I would tell
Yeah.
them to take a deep breath. That this is a process that at the other end, if you choose to be divorced, or even if you don't want to be divorced, if taken to the full length of the process, you will be divorced. So don't panic. Get sound financial advice. Get good legal representation, and just take a deep breath and take it one step at a time. There will be another side to this process. So don't
Yeah.
panic would be my first step.
Yeah. And then what about people who come in and say, I'm going to take my children and go live at, my mother's house for the next month? What would you say to that?
Once again, people say, "Oh, you've heard this all before." And while we've heard many versions of dysfunction or dissatisfaction or upset between parties, every case has got its own individual facts.
Yeah.
So, no, I don't think you should take rash action unless, of course, you're in imminent fear of bodily harm. We
Correct.
deal with domestic violence often, so yes, in those
Mhm.
scenarios, you should seek protection of family. You should seek protection of law enforcement if necessary, but we don't generally get a large number of those cases. I think you
Mhm.
have to just stop, look, listen, and figure this out. Because at the
Mhm.
other side, if you're both fit and proper parents, you will both be sharing your children in some form or manner.
Yeah.
So running off to the mother's house or the grandmother's house only in situations of imminent harm.
Yeah. Yep. Good. Yeah. And a lot of people ask me, like, well, my spouse has been planning this for a long time, and I know they've either A, racked up debt or moved money around and spent money and hidden money and things like that. And, what I usually tell people is, look, through this process, we can uncover everything. It's full disclosure. Whether you try it through mediation, we will ask for documents going back as far as you want to look at, right? I mean, 3 to 5 years. We sort of say to clients, we trust but we verify. The mediation process is the spirit of transparency. So I'm sort of the document organizer, the document requester, and we'll ask for things that I think I want to review too, just to verify certain things that have happened. But people wonder if their spouse has been hiding assets or racking up bills that they don't know about. All of that's discoverable, and we will figure it out. So that's the end of our podcast. I think we've kind of covered all the angles as a first step. Carrie, what do you think?
There's lots of areas to be covered, but there's many specifics that we'll get into in the future podcasts.
Yeah, yeah. Join us for our next podcast, which is which path to take, whether it's a litigated case or a mediated case or alternate dispute resolution scenarios. We'll dive deeper into that. And I want to thank you both, or thank Kerry for joining me, my co presenter and
Well, there
co
were two of me.
mediator.
There was the divorce lawyer and there was divorce mediator. So there were two people here.
That's right. You bring a lot of expertise to the table. If you want further information, go to our website, www.collaborativedivorcestrategies.com. You can learn more about what we do. You can also reach me at 401-258-8737. And we look forward to seeing you again on the Smarter Divorce podcast.